So here's the thing about working graveyard shifts, you get used to weird stuff happening at 3 a.m. Like really used to it. My name's Jake, and I've been pulling overnight security at the Millfield Industrial Complex for about 8 months now. Nothing too crazy, just walking around making sure nobody's stealing copper wire or tagging the walls with spray paint. The pay's decent, the work's easy, and most importantly, it keeps me away from people during normal human hours. I'm not antisocial or anything, I don't know, I guess I like the quiet. There's something peaceful about having an entire industrial park to yourself, just you and the hum of machinery and the occasional freight train rolling through in the distance. Most nights, the biggest excitement I get is shooing away some teenagers trying to party in the loading bays. But this particular Tuesday night in March was different from the moment I clocked in. The weather had been acting weird all week. One day it's snowing, the next it's like 70 degrees, then back to freezing rain. Classic Midwest spring nonsense. But Tuesday night, man, the fog rolled in thick as soup around 10 p.m. and just kept getting worse. By midnight, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The security lights were just these dim orange blobs floating in gray nothingness, and every sound seemed muffled and distorted. Even the freight trains sounded different, their horns echoing off in weird directions like the fog was bending the sound waves. I'd finished my first round of the complex and was heading back to the security shack when I heard it. A train whistle, but not like the usual freight horns I was used to. This one was higher pitched, more musical, like something from an old movie, and it was coming from the wrong direction. See, the main freight line runs east-west through the industrial park, but this whistle was coming from the north, where there's nothing but abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots. I stopped walking and listened, trying to figure out what I was hearing. The whistle came again, clearer this time, followed by the rhythmic chuffing of what sounded like a steam engine. Which was impossible because nobody runs steam trains anymore, especially not through abandoned industrial areas at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound, thinking maybe some train enthusiasts were running a heritage line I didn't know about. You know how these railroad guys are? They'll restore old locomotives and run special excursions for tourists. Maybe they had some late-night event planned. The fog was so thick I had to feel my way along the chain-link fence that borders the complex. My flashlight beam just bounced back at me like I was shining it into a white wall. But I could hear the train getting closer, and underneath the engine sounds I started picking up other noises. Voices maybe. People talking and laughing like they were having a good time. That's when I found the gap in the fence. Not cut, not damaged, just open. Like there was supposed to be a gate there, even though I'd walked this perimeter 100 times and never seen anything but continuous chain link. But there it was, a neat opening just wide enough for a person to walk through. The voices were definitely coming from the other side, along with the smell of coal smoke and something else. Something that reminded me of my grandmother's house, old wood, leather, and maybe pipe tobacco. Comforting smells, you know? The kind that make you think of family gatherings and better times. I should have radioed back to the main office, or at least made a note in my log. That's what the job manual says. Document anything unusual. But honestly, I was curious. In 8 months of walking around empty buildings, this was the first genuinely interesting thing that had happened. I stepped through the gap in the fence and immediately felt different. The fog lifted just enough that I could see I was standing on a platform. Not a modern platform, but something old-fashioned, made of worn brick with cast-iron lampposts that cast warm yellow light in perfect circles. The air was warmer here too, like I'd walked into a bubble of summer in the middle of a cold March night. The train was magnificent. I mean, absolutely incredible. It looked like something from the 1940s, all sleek black metal and chrome accents with windows that glowed with warm light. Steam hissed gently from beneath the engine, and I could see passengers moving around inside the cars, people dressed in clothes that looked vintage but somehow brand new. A conductor stepped down from the nearest car. He was an older black man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, wearing a uniform that looked like it came straight from a railroad museum. Everything about him screamed authentic. The brass buttons on his jacket, the way he carried himself, even the old-fashioned pocket watch he pulled out to check the time. "Evening, son," he said, his voice carrying that warm authority that some older guys just have naturally. "You looking to catch the night express?" I stumbled over my words, still trying to process what I was seeing. "I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a train line here. I work security for the industrial complex and I've never seen." "Oh, we don't run regular service," he said with a chuckle. "This here's a special line. We only stop for folks who need to get somewhere they can't reach any other way." That should have been my first warning sign. I mean, what kind of train only picks up people who need to get somewhere they can't reach any other way? But like I said, I was curious, and the whole scene had this dreamlike quality that made normal logic seem less important. "Where does it go?" I asked. The conductor's smile got a little wider. "Depends on the passenger. We make stops all along the line: Millbrook Junction, Shadowmere Station, Crosswinds Depot. Wherever folks need to get to, we'll get 'em there." I'd never heard of any of those places, but I figured they might be small towns outside the city. Rural stops that didn't show up on regular maps. "Thing is," the conductor continued, "we've got some rules on this line. Special regulations for passenger safety. You interested in hearing them before you decide whether to board?" I nodded, and he reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small card printed on heavy paper that looked aged but well-maintained. The text was an old-fashioned script that reminded me of Victorian-era documents. "Night Express Passenger Regulations. Remain in your assigned car during travel. Movement between cars without conductor approval may result in disorientation or loss of destination. Do not consume food or beverages offered by other passengers. All refreshments must be provided through official dining service. Keep window shades drawn during night travel. External views may cause distress or confusion. If you hear someone calling your name, verify with the conductor before responding. Not all voices on the Night Express originate from fellow passengers. Exit only at your designated stop. Early departure may result in arriving at an unintended destination." I read through the rules twice, trying to make sense of them. They seemed weirdly specific, like they'd been written in response to particular incidents. What kind of train needed rules about not looking out the windows or checking with the conductor before responding to someone calling your name? "These are unusual," I said. The conductor nodded solemnly. "The Night Express runs through some unique territory, son. These rules have kept passengers safe for more than 70 years. I'd strongly recommend following them if you decide to ride with us." "How much is a ticket?" "No charge for first-time passengers," he said. "Consider it a courtesy ride. Though I should mention, once you board, you're committed to the journey until we reach your stop. No getting off early, no changing your mind halfway through." I looked back toward the industrial complex, but I couldn't see it through the fog. My radio crackled with static, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd checked in with the main office. How long had I been standing here talking to the conductor? "What time is it?" I asked. He consulted his pocket watch. "Just past 3 a.m. We'll have you back before dawn, don't worry about that." Something about the way he said "back" bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Back from where? I hadn't told him I wanted to go anywhere specific. But the train was warm and inviting, and honestly, I was tired of walking empty buildings in the fog. A nice train ride through the countryside sounded like a pleasant break from my routine. What was the worst that could happen? Famous last words, right? "All right," I said. "I guess I'll give it a try." The conductor's smile got even wider. "Excellent. Welcome aboard the Night Express, mister." He paused, waiting for me to fill in my name. "Jake," I said. "Jake Morrison." "Welcome aboard, Mr. Morrison. Car 3 is available, nice and quiet, perfect for a peaceful journey." He gestured toward the train, and I climbed the steps into Car 3. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Rich red velvet seats, polished wood paneling, and brass fixtures that gleamed in the warm electric light. It looked like something from the golden age of rail travel, when taking the train was an event, not just transportation. There were a few other passengers scattered throughout the car. A businessman in a suit that looked like it cost more than I made in 6 months. An elderly woman in a fur coat reading what appeared to be a very old book. A young couple dressed like they were going to a fancy dinner party. Nobody looked up when I entered, which seemed a little odd, but hey, maybe they were just tired. I found a seat by the window and settled in, putting the rules card in my shirt pocket. The conductor appeared beside me. When had he gotten on the train? And handed me a small brass token. "Your ticket, Mr. Morrison. Keep it with you at all times during the journey." The token was warm to the touch and surprisingly heavy. On one side was an engraved image of the train, and on the other was a number, 777. Lucky sevens, I thought. Maybe this would turn out to be a good night after all. The train began to move with barely a jolt, so smoothly I hardly realized we were in motion until I saw the platform sliding past the window. I reached up to adjust the shade, remembering rule number 3 about keeping it drawn, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see where we were going. The view outside was wrong. Instead of the abandoned warehouses and overgrown lots I expected, I saw rolling countryside under a clear starry sky. No fog, no industrial buildings, just endless fields and distant hills that I'd never seen before, even though I'd lived in this area my whole life. We were traveling fast, much faster than any train should be able to go through what I remembered as a pretty built-up area. The landscape flew past like we were doing highway speeds, but the ride was still incredibly smooth. No rattling, no swaying, just the gentle rhythm of wheels on tracks. I was so focused on the impossible scenery that I almost missed the sound of someone calling my name. Jake. Jake Morrison. The voice was faint, like it was coming from far away, but I could definitely hear someone saying my name. I looked around the car, but none of the other passengers had moved. They were all still in exactly the same positions as when I'd boarded, and none of them seemed to be paying attention to me. Jake. Over here, Jake. The voice was coming from somewhere behind me. I started to turn around, then remembered rule number 4. If you hear someone calling your name, verify with the conductor before responding. I reached up and pressed the call button above my seat. A few moments later, the conductor appeared in the aisle beside me. Everything all right, Mr. Morrison? Someone's calling my name, I said quietly. The rules said I should check with you before responding. His expression became serious. Good man. You're following the regulations exactly as you should. Don't respond to that voice, it's not meant for you. What do you mean it's not meant for me? It's saying my name. Some things on the Night Express know how to use names they shouldn't know, he said. That voice isn't calling Jake Morrison the security guard. It's calling a different Jake Morrison, one who belongs to a different time and place. Best to just ignore it. That sent a chill down my spine. A different Jake Morrison? The Night Express has been running for a long time, son. We've carried many passengers over the years and sometimes echoes linger. Don't worry about it. As long as you follow the rules, you'll be perfectly safe. He patted my shoulder reassuringly and moved on down the aisle. The voice calling my name faded away, but I noticed that the businessman in the expensive suit had turned slightly in his seat. Not enough to be looking at me directly, but enough that I could see his profile. His face was wrong. Not deformed or obviously inhuman, just off. The proportions were slightly askew, like someone had tried to draw a human face from memory and gotten some of the details wrong. When he smiled, and I couldn't see what he was smiling about, his teeth were too white and too sharp. I pulled the shade down and settled back in my seat, trying to convince myself that I was just tired and seeing things that weren't there. The gentle rocking motion of the train was soothing, and despite the weird stuff that had been happening, I found myself starting to relax. That's when the elderly woman in the fur coat spoke up. First time on the Night Express? She asked, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. I nodded. Yeah, you. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Oh heavens no. I've been writing this line for, well, let's just say quite some time. It's a wonderful service, really. Takes you exactly where you need to go. Where are you heading? Home, she said, and something about the way she said it made me think she meant something more than just a house or apartment. I've been away far too long. What about you, dear? Where is the Night Express taking you? That was a good question. I realized I'd never actually told the conductor where I wanted to go. He just said car 3 was available and handed me a ticket. I'm not really sure, I admitted. I was just curious about the train. Her smile became sad. Oh, sweetie. Nobody boards the Night Express just out of curiosity. We all have somewhere we need to be, even if we don't realize it at first. Before I could ask what she meant by that, the lights in the car dimmed and the conductor's voice came over the intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching Millbrook Junction. Millbrook Junction, next stop. Passengers ticketed for Millbrook Junction, please prepare for departure. I felt the train beginning to slow. Through the crack between the window shade and the frame, I could see lights approaching. Another station platform lit by the same old-fashioned lampposts as the one where I'd boarded. The businessman with the wrong face stood up and gathered his belongings. As he walked past my seat, he stopped and looked down at me with those two bright eyes. Enjoy the rest of your journey, Mr. Morrison, he said, his voice carrying an odd echoing quality. I do hope you find what you're looking for. I hadn't told him my name. The train came to a stop, and through the window I could see the businessman stepping onto the platform. But instead of walking toward a station building or parking area, he simply stood there in the lamplight, perfectly still, as if he was waiting for something. The train began moving again, and I watched him grow smaller in the distance until the lights of Millbrook Junction disappeared into the darkness behind us. The elderly woman was gone too. I hadn't seen her leave, but her seat was empty. I was alone in car 3 now, or at least I thought I was. The young couple was still there, but they hadn't moved a muscle since I'd boarded. They were sitting so perfectly still that I started to wonder if they were actually breathing. The conductor appeared beside my seat again. Everything all right, Mr. Morrison? You look a bit unsettled. The businessman knew my name, but I never told him what it was. Ah. The conductor nodded knowingly. That happens sometimes. Some passengers pick up information they shouldn't have. Nothing to worry about as long as you follow the rules. And the woman, she just disappeared. Mrs. Hendricks reached her destination. She's been trying to get home for a very long time. I'm glad she finally made it. Something about the way he said that bothered me, but I couldn't figure out why. The train was picking up speed again, and I could feel exhaustion starting to set in. The gentle swaying motion and the rhythmic sound of wheels on tracks were incredibly soothing. How many more stops before we get back to where I got on? I asked. The conductor checked his pocket watch. Well, that depends on where you're actually going, son. The Night Express doesn't really do round trips. We take passengers where they need to go, and that's not always the same as where they started. But you said I'd be back before dawn. Oh, you will be, he said with that warm smile. Time works a little differently on the Night Express. Don't worry about that. He moved on down the aisle, and I settled back in my seat trying to make sense of what was happening. The train, the impossible countryside, the passengers who knew things they shouldn't know, the rules that seemed designed to protect against very specific supernatural dangers. I was starting to think I hadn't just boarded a heritage railroad. I was starting to think I'd boarded something else entirely, something that just happened to look like a train. The intercom crackled again. Next stop, Shadowmere Station. Shadowmere Station, next stop. I checked my watch. It still read 3:17 a.m., exactly the same time it had shown when I'd first boarded the train. The hands weren't moving. That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. My watch wasn't just broken, it was stuck. The second hand would twitch forward, then snap back to the same position like it was fighting against some invisible force. 3:17 a.m. over and over again. I tapped the face, shook my wrist, even held it up to my ear, but all I could hear was this weird ticking that didn't match the movement of the hands. The young couple across the aisle hadn't moved since I'd gotten on the train. I mean, literally hadn't moved. Same position, same angle, even the same expression on their faces. The woman was mid-laugh, her mouth open, eyes crinkled with joy, but frozen like someone had hit pause on a movie. The man had his arm around her, looking at her with this adoring expression that would have been sweet if it wasn't so completely unnatural. I was staring at them, trying to figure out if they were even real, when the woman's head snapped toward me. Not turned, snapped. Like it was on a swivel or something. 1 second she's looking at her boyfriend, the next she's staring directly at me with those same laughing eyes, but now they seemed cold and hungry instead of happy. You shouldn't be here, she said, but her mouth didn't move. The words came from her, but her lips were still frozen in that laugh. This isn't your train, Jake Morrison. I practically jumped out of my seat. What the hell? Language, please, the man said, also without moving his mouth. There are ladies present. Both of them were staring at me now, their heads turned at impossible angles while their bodies remained in the same loving pose. It was like someone had twisted their necks 180 degrees. I hit the call button so hard I probably broke it. The conductor appeared almost instantly, like he'd been waiting right outside the car. Problem, Mr. Morrison? I pointed at the couple, but when I looked back they were normal again. Facing each other, the woman mid-laugh, the man gazing at her adoringly. No sign that anything weird had happened. They were talking to me. Without moving their mouths. Their heads were turned around. The conductor followed my gaze and nodded calmly. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. They've been with us for quite some time. Lovely couple, got engaged on this very train back in 1953. 1953? I did the math in my head. That was 70 years ago. They look like they're in their 20s. Time works differently on the Night Express, the conductor said, like this explained everything. The Pattersons are very happy here. They get to experience their perfect moment over and over again. The night he proposed, when they were young and in love and full of hope for the future. But they just threatened me. Did they? The conductor looked genuinely surprised. That doesn't sound like them at all. What exactly did they say? I tried to remember the exact words. The woman said I shouldn't be here, that this wasn't my train. The man told me to watch my language. The conductor's expression grew thoughtful. Interesting. You know, Mr. Morrison, sometimes the other passengers can sense things about newcomers that even I miss. Tell me, what made you board the Night Express tonight? I was curious, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, they felt like a lie. I heard the train and went to investigate. Just curiosity? He studied my face carefully. Nothing else drawing you out into the fog? No particular reason you felt compelled to leave your security rounds and explore? I thought back to earlier that evening. Had there been something else? Some feeling or impulse that made me abandon my post to chase after a mysterious train. The more I tried to remember, the fuzzier my motivation became. I'm not sure. The conductor pulled out his pocket watch and frowned at it. We're running slightly behind schedule. That's unusual. The night express is always precisely on time. He snapped the watch closed and looked at me again. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you to be extra careful about following the rules for the rest of your journey. Something about your presence is affecting the normal operation of the train, and that could be dangerous for everyone aboard. What do you mean, affecting the operation? Well, for starters, we've never had passengers from different eras interact before. Mrs. Hendricks was from 1918, Spanish flu got her. She'd been riding with us for over a century trying to get home to her children. But tonight, she actually spoke to you, and now she's reached her destination. That's unprecedented. A chill ran down my spine. She died in 1918? Oh yes. Everyone on the night express is dead, Mr. Morrison. I thought you understood that. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. The question is, how did you board? Living people can't usually see the night express, let alone climb aboard. The rational part of my brain started screaming. Dead people. I was on a train full of dead people. The businessman with the wrong face, the elderly woman who'd been trying to get home for a century, the young couple frozen in 1953. All dead. I'm not dead, I said, but my voice sounded weak and uncertain. No, the conductor agreed. You're very much alive. Which raises some fascinating questions about why you're here and what effect your presence might have on our other passengers. Before I could respond, the intercom crackled to life again. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching Shadowmere Station. Shadowmere Station, next stop. Through the gap in the window shade, I could see lights ahead. But these weren't the warm, welcoming yellow lights of the previous station. These were cold and blue, casting everything in an eerie glow that reminded me of moonlight on snow. This is your stop, Mr. Morrison, the conductor said. My stop? But I never said I wanted to go to Shadowmere Station. I don't even know where that is. The night express takes passengers where they need to go, he said, repeating what he'd told me earlier. Not necessarily where they want to go. The train was slowing down and I could feel panic building in my chest. I didn't want to get off at some creepy-sounding station in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to go back to my security job, back to my normal, boring life of walking empty buildings and checking door handles. What if I don't want to get off? The conductor's expression became sympathetic but firm. I'm afraid that's not an option. Rule number 5, exit only at your designated stop. The night express doesn't allow passengers to ride past their intended destination. The train came to a complete stop with a hiss of steam. Through the window, I could see the platform at Shadowmere Station. It was older than the first station, built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the blue light rather than reflect it. Figures moved in the shadows between the lamp posts, but I couldn't make out details. They seemed to flow rather than walk, like they were made of smoke or fog. I don't want to go out there, I said, and I didn't care how scared I sounded. I understand your reluctance, the conductor said gently. But Mr. Morrison, I think Shadowmere Station is exactly where you need to be right now. Sometimes we have to face difficult truths about ourselves, and this station, well, it has a way of helping people do that. The door at the end of the car opened with a sound like a coffin lid creaking. Cold air flowed in, carrying the scent of old stone and something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's funeral. Flowers and formaldehyde and the particular silence that comes with death. Go on, the conductor said, his voice still kind but now carrying an undertone of authority that made it clear this wasn't really a choice. Take your time, look around, learn what you need to learn. When you're ready, there'll be another train. I stood up on shaky legs, clutching the brass token he'd given me earlier. It was ice cold now, so cold it almost burned my fingers. As I walked toward the door, I heard the young couple speaking behind me. He's not ready, the woman said, her voice full of pity. Poor thing has no idea what happened to him. Give him time, the man replied. They all figure it out eventually. I turned around to ask what they meant, but they were frozen again, locked in their eternal moment of 1953 happiness. Their eyes followed me as I walked past, though, and I could swear I saw genuine sympathy in their expressions. The conductor appeared at my elbow as I reached the door. One piece of advice, Mr. Morrison. At Shadowmere Station, you'll see things that might be hard to accept. Remember that denial doesn't change the truth, it just makes the truth harder to bear. I stepped off the train onto the platform and immediately felt the weight of the place. The air was thick and heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. The blue lights cast everything in stark shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. And the figures I'd seen from the train window, they were still there, drifting between the lampposts like lost memories. The train pulled away behind me with a mournful whistle, leaving me alone on the platform with the shadow figures and the crushing certainty that I was very, very far from home. The station building was carved from the same dark stone as the platform, with Gothic arches and gargoyle faces that seemed to watch my every move. Above the main entrance, carved letters spelled out Shadowmere Station, Gateway to Remembrance, in an old-fashioned font that made my eyes water to look at directly. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't have much choice. The platform extended in both directions until it disappeared into darkness, and the shadow figures were drifting closer, drawn by some invisible force. Up close, I could see they weren't really figures at all. They were more like impressions of people, vague shapes that suggested human forms but had no real substance. One of them paused near me, and I caught a glimpse of what might have been a face. A woman middle-aged with kind eyes and a sad smile. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, images flashed through my mind: a car skidding on ice, the sickening crunch of metal, a moment of impact, then nothing. Another shadow figure drifted past, this one suggesting a young man in work clothes. More images: a construction site, a safety harness that failed, the ground rushing up to meet him. Then nothing. I realized what these figures were. They were memories of death, impressions left behind by people who had passed through Shadowmere Station on their way to whatever came next. This wasn't just a train station. It was some kind of processing center for the recently deceased. And if I was here, if the Night Express had brought me to this place specifically. No, I said out loud, my voice echoing off the stone arches. No, that's not possible. I'm alive. I'm breathing, my heart is beating, I can feel everything. Dead people don't feel things. But even as I said it, I started examining the evidence. The fog that had rolled into the industrial complex. When had that started exactly? My security rounds had become increasingly difficult, with the air getting thicker and harder to breathe. I'd blamed it on the weather, but what if it wasn't weather at all? The Millfield Industrial Complex used a lot of old equipment. Boilers, generators, chemical storage tanks for the manufacturing companies that rented space there. What if something had gone wrong? What if there'd been a leak, a malfunction, something that had flooded the area with toxic gas? I pulled out my phone to call my supervisor, but the screen was black. Not dead black, like it was absorbing light instead of reflecting it. When I pressed the power button, nothing happened. Your electronic devices won't work here, a voice said behind me. I spun around to see a woman emerging from the station building. She was young, maybe in her 20s, wearing clothes that looked modern but somehow faded, like old photographs. This is a place of transition, she continued, walking toward me with a peculiar gliding motion that reminded me of the shadow figures. Technology from the living world doesn't function properly. I'm Sarah, by the way. Sarah Chin. Jake Morrison, I replied automatically, then caught myself. Wait, are you dead? Oh yes, very much so. She said it with a matter-of-fact tone that was somehow more disturbing than if she'd been dramatic about it. Car accident about 6 months ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. I was on my way home from my nursing shift at the hospital. But you look so normal. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Thank you, I think. I'm what you might call a guide here at Shadowmere Station. I help newcomers adjust to their situation and understand what comes next. I'm not dead, I said firmly. I can't be dead. I feel fine. I feel normal. What's the last thing you remember clearly? Sarah asked gently. Before you heard the train whistle? I tried to think back, but my memories of the evening were getting fuzzy around the edges. I remembered starting my shift, doing my first round of the complex. Then, fog. Thick fog that got worse and worse until I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The fog, I said slowly. It came in really thick, made it hard to breathe. And then, I heard the train. But as I said it, I realized there was a gap. A period of time between the fog getting bad and hearing the train whistle that I couldn't account for. How long had I been walking around in that fog? How long had I been struggling to breathe? Jake, Sarah said softly, what kind of heating system does the industrial complex use? Old natural gas boilers, I said automatically. They've been acting up all winter. Maintenance keeps saying they'll fix them, but... I trailed off as the implications hit me. Oh God. Carbon monoxide is odorless and colorless, Sarah said, her voice full of compassion. You wouldn't have known anything was wrong until it was too late. The fog you remember, That was your consciousness shutting down, your brain trying to make sense of what was happening as you lost oxygen. I sank down onto a bench I hadn't noticed before, my legs suddenly unable to support me. But I feel alive. I feel normal. That's common, Sarah said, sitting beside me. Death by poisoning can be very peaceful. Your body just goes to sleep. Many people don't realize what's happened right away. That's why places like Shadowmere Station exist. To help souls understand their situation and make the transition. Transition to what? That depends on you, she said. Some people move on right away, ready to accept what comes next. Others need time to process, to say goodbye, to finish unfinished business. And some. She gestured toward the shadow figures still drifting around the platform. Some get stuck in the memory of their death and never move forward. I looked at the brass token the conductor had given me, still clutched in my hand. In the blue light of the station I could see it more clearly. The number wasn't 777 like I'd thought. It was my employee ID number from the security company. And the engraved image wasn't a generic train, it was specifically the Night Express, right down to the detailed brass fittings. How long do I have to decide? I asked. As long as you need, Sarah said. But Jake, can I give you some advice? Don't wait too long. The longer you stay in denial, the harder it becomes to accept the truth. And acceptance is the only way forward. A new train was pulling into the station, this one different from the Night Express. Sleeker, more modern, with warm white lights instead of the golden glow I'd become used to. As it came to a stop, I could see passengers getting off, people who looked at peace, who moved with purpose and confidence. Where are they going? I asked. Forward, Sarah said simply. To whatever comes after this life. Different people call it different things. Heaven, the next plane of existence, reincarnation, eternal rest. But they're all moving toward the same destination. Acceptance of what they were, gratitude for what they had, and readiness for what comes next. I watched the peaceful passengers disappear into passages that opened in the station walls, passages that seemed to lead toward a warm, welcoming light. For a moment, I felt a pull toward that light, a sense that it would be easy to just let go and see where it led. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Is there really another train? I asked. The conductor said there would be. Sarah nodded. The Night Express makes regular stops here. Some passengers ride it for years before they're ready to get off for good. But Jake, each time you board, it gets a little harder to remember who you were in life. The train exists between states. It's not quite life, not quite death. Stay on it too long, and you might end up like Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, frozen in a single perfect moment forever. The modern train pulled away, leaving the platform quiet except for the drifting shadow figures and the soft sound of Sarah's breathing. Or what would have been breathing if she were alive. In the distance, I could hear another train whistle. Higher pitched, more musical. The Night Express, coming back for passengers who weren't ready to move on. I had a choice to make. I wasn't ready. The words kept echoing in my head as the Night Express pulled into Shadowmere Station for the second time. Sarah was still sitting beside me on the bench, patient as a saint, but I could see the concern in her eyes. You don't have to get back on, she said quietly. You could stay here, process things at your own pace. Some people need time. But I shook my head. The truth about my death was still too raw, too impossible to fully accept. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Dead at 26 because some ancient boiler finally decided to malfunction on the one night I was too dedicated to my crappy job to leave early. It was so mundane, so random, so completely unfair that part of me refused to believe it. I need to see more, I said, standing up as the train came to a complete stop. I need to understand what this all means before I can move on. Sarah nodded sadly. I understand. Just remember what I told you about staying on the train too long. Each journey makes it harder to remember who you were. The same conductor stepped down from the Night Express, but something about him looked different now. Less solid, maybe, or like he was slightly out of focus. His uniform seemed faded, and when he smiled at me, I noticed his teeth weren't quite the right shape. Mr. Morrison, he said, his voice carrying that same warm authority but with an echo I hadn't noticed before. Ready for the next leg of your journey? Where does the train go from here? Wherever you need to go to find the answers you're looking for. He gestured toward the train. Car 7 is available tonight. Nice and private, you'll have it all to yourself. I looked back at Sarah one more time. She gave me an encouraging smile, but there was sadness in it. The kind of sadness that comes from watching someone make a mistake you can't stop them from making. Good luck, Jake, she said. Remember who you are. I climbed aboard Car 7 and immediately noticed the difference. This car was older than Car 3 had been, with worn velvet seats and brass fixtures that had tarnished to a dull green. The air smelled of dust and old leather, like an antique store that hadn't been opened in decades. More importantly, I was alone. Completely alone in a way that felt oppressive and unnatural. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat, assuming I still had a heartbeat. I wasn't sure about anything anymore. The train began to move and I settled into a seat by the window. This time I didn't bother pulling down the shade. If I was going to figure out what was happening to me, I needed to see everything, rules be damned. The landscape outside was different again. Not the rolling countryside I'd seen on the first leg of the journey, but something that looked like my own memories given physical form. I saw the apartment complex where I'd grown up, but the buildings were twisted and stretched like they'd been pulled through a funhouse mirror. The playground where I'd spent countless summer afternoons was there, but the swings hung from trees that grew impossibly tall, disappearing into a sky that looked more like the inside of a cave than open air. As the train picked up speed, the memory landscape began shifting faster. My high school appeared, but the hallways were flooded with water that reflected faces I didn't recognize. The community college where I'd taken criminal justice courses before dropping out materialized beside the tracks, but it was on fire, the flames burning cold and blue like the lights at Shadowmere Station. Then I saw the Millfield Industrial Complex. It looked exactly like it should, down to the security shack where I'd spent so many boring nights reading paperback novels and doing crossword puzzles. But there was something wrong with the scene. The building was too bright, lit up like it was daytime even though the sky around it was completely black. And there were people walking around the complex. Dozens of them, all wearing the same security guard uniform I'd worn for 8 months. As the train passed closer to the complex, I could see the figures more clearly. They were all me. Different versions of myself, maybe, or the same me living out different possibilities. One Jake was walking his regular security rounds, flashlight in hand, checking door handles like he was supposed to. Another Jake was sitting in the security shack, feet up on the desk, watching something on his phone. A third Jake was in the parking lot, looking up at the sky like he was waiting for something. And in the middle of it all, barely visible through the windows of the main building, I could see another figure. This one was lying on the lobby floor, perfectly still, surrounded by maintenance workers in hazmat suits. That was me too. The real me. The dead me. I pressed my face against the window, trying to see more details, but the train was already moving past the complex. The scene faded into the strange memory landscape of twisted buildings and impossible geography, leaving me with more questions than answers. Disturbing, isn't it? A voice said from behind me. I spun around to find a man sitting in the seat across the aisle, even though the car had been empty when I'd boarded. He was wearing a security guard uniform identical to mine, but his name tag read Jake Morrison, in the same font as my own. "Who are you?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. "I'm you," he said matter-of-factly. "Or rather, I'm who you could have been if you'd made different choices. I'm the Jake Morrison who called in sick that night instead of going to work." He looked exactly like me, but there was something different about his eyes. They held a confidence I'd never felt, a sense of purpose that had always eluded me in life. "You're not real," I said. "Neither are you technically," he replied with a shrug. "We're both just echoes at this point, memories trying to make sense of themselves. The difference is I've accepted what I am." "And what's that?" "A mistake," he said simply. "A life that was wasted on meaningless work, meaningless relationships, meaningless routine. I died at 26 having accomplished absolutely nothing of value. No wife, no kids, no lasting impact on the world. Just 8 months of walking around empty buildings for minimum wage until a faulty boiler killed me in the most pathetic way possible." His words hit me like physical blows because they were true. That was exactly how I'd been thinking about my life since Sarah had explained what happened to me. 26 years of existence that added up to nothing more than a security guard uniform hanging in a locker and an employee file that would be deleted as soon as they found a replacement. "But it doesn't have to be that way," the other Jake continued. "The Night Express offers opportunities. Ways to give your existence meaning even after death. You just have to be willing to embrace what you've become." "What do you mean?" He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing at the passing landscape. "Look around you, Jake. This train exists between life and death, carrying souls who aren't ready to move on. But it needs staff, needs people who understand what the passengers are going through because they've been through it themselves." "You mean become like the conductor?" "Exactly. Think about it. You spent months protecting empty buildings, keeping watch over places and things that belong to other people. This would be the same thing but with actual purpose. You'd be protecting souls in transition, helping them navigate the most important journey they'll ever take. I had to admit the idea was appealing. My security work had always felt hollow because nothing I was protecting actually mattered. But helping confused souls understand their death, guiding them toward whatever came next, that would have real meaning. "What's the catch?" I asked. The other Jake smiled, and for a moment his face flickered, showing something else underneath. Something that wasn't quite human. "No catch," he said. "Just commitment. Once you accept a position on the Night Express, you're part of the system permanently." "But Jake, what were you going back to anyway? A life of poverty and isolation? At least here your work would matter." Before I could respond, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching Crosswinds Depot. Crosswinds Depot, next stop. All passengers please prepare for departure." "This is my stop," the other Jake said, straightening his uniform. "But I hope you'll consider what I've said. The conductor will be retiring soon. He's been at this job for nearly a century. The position will be available for someone qualified." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been riding this train a lot longer than you have," he said, and suddenly I could see through him. He was becoming transparent, fading like morning fog. "Time works differently here, remember? I've had months to explore the possibilities while you're still having your first night." The train was slowing down, and through the window I could see another station approaching. This one was different from both the original platform and Shadowmere station. More modern, built from steel and glass like a contemporary subway stop. But there was something sterile about it, something that reminded me of a hospital or morgue. "Think about the offer, Jake," the other me said as he headed for the door. "What else are you going to do? Spend eternity in denial? Become one of those shadow figures, drifting around Shadowmere Station until you forget who you ever were?" He stepped off the train and immediately vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I was alone again in car 7, feeling more confused than ever. The conductor appeared beside my seat, his form even less solid than before. Up close, I could see through him to the empty seats on the other side of the car. "How was your conversation with yourself?" he asked. "You knew he was there?" "The Night Express shows passengers what they need to see," he said. "Sometimes that's other souls looking for guidance. Sometimes it's memories of lives that could have been. And sometimes it's aspects of yourself you haven't acknowledged yet." Was he telling the truth about the conductor position? The conductor studied me with those pale, colorless eyes. "He was telling you a version of the truth. Yes, I am looking to retire. Yes, the position requires someone who understands both life and death, someone with protective instincts and a desire to help others. But Jake, taking this job wouldn't be about finding meaning in a meaningless existence. It would be about accepting responsibility for something much larger than yourself." "What do you mean?" "The Night Express doesn't just carry individual souls," he said. "It maintains the boundary between life and death. Every passenger who boards is someone who died in confusion, denial, or with unfinished business. If they're not properly guided, they can become trapped between states, unable to move forward but also unable to return to life. They become tears in the fabric of reality itself." He gestured toward the window where I could see Crosswinds Depot sliding past. The modern station was full of people, but they all moved with the same mechanical precision I'd noticed in some of the other passengers. Perfect, repetitive motions that suggested they weren't really people anymore, just automated responses playing out the same actions forever. "These are souls who refuse to accept their death," the conductor continued. "They chose to remain in familiar patterns rather than face the unknown. Over time, they lose their individuality, their memories, their humanity. They become part of the station's machinery." "That's horrible." "It's what happens when someone tries to cheat death by hiding in the spaces between life and the afterlife," he said. "The conductor's job is to prevent this, to help souls understand their situation and make genuine choices about their future, not just default to denial or fear." The train was accelerating again, leaving Crosswinds Depot behind. I could see the mechanical figures growing smaller in the distance, still performing their endless, meaningless tasks. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. "Then you continue riding until you're ready to get off. But Jake, I should warn you, each journey changes you a little more. Every time you board the Night Express, you lose some connection to who you were in life. Eventually, you might forget that you have a choice at all." I thought about the young couple in car 3, frozen in their perfect moment from 1953. About Mrs. Hendricks, who'd spent a century trying to get home to children who were probably dead themselves by now. About all the passengers who'd become part of the train's strange ecosystem instead of moving on to whatever came next. "How long do I have to decide?" "The next stop is Terminal Station," the conductor said. It's the end of the line, the place where all journeys on the Night Express conclude. You'll have to make your choice there. What kind of choice? The same choice every soul faces eventually, he said. Accept what you were, let go of what you thought you wanted to be, and step forward into whatever comes next. Or find a way to avoid that choice and risk losing yourself entirely in the process. The lights in car 7 began to dim, and I could feel the train's rhythm changing, becoming slower and more deliberate. Through the window, the memory landscape was fading into something that looked like deep space, endless darkness punctuated by distant stars that might have been other trains carrying other lost souls. Terminal station, the conductor announced over the intercom. End of the line. All passengers must disembark. Thank you for riding the Night Express. I felt the train beginning to slow, and ahead in the darkness, I could see lights approaching. Not the warm yellow of the first station or the cold blue of Shadowmere, but something that looked like sunrise, golden and welcoming and full of promise. But as we got closer, I could see that Terminal Station was massive beyond comprehension. Platforms stretching in every direction, with thousands of trains arriving from throughout time and space. And standing at the center of it all was a figure that made the conductor look solid by comparison. Something that might once have been human but was now made of light and shadow and the sound of every train whistle that had ever echoed across the world. The station master. The entity responsible for the entire system of death and transition and whatever came after. The train came to a final stop, and I knew that whatever choice I made here would be permanent. There would be no more rides on the Night Express, no more opportunities to delay or reconsider. It was time to decide who Jake Morrison was going to be for eternity. The door opened with a sound like thunder, and I stepped off the train into my final destination. Terminal Station wasn't just massive, it was infinite. As I stepped off the Night Express, I could see platforms stretching beyond the horizon in every direction, layer upon layer of tracks and walkways and bridges that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Thousands of trains were arriving and departing constantly, each one carrying souls from different times, different places, different ways of dying. The sound was overwhelming at first. The whistle of steam engines, the electric hum of modern trains, the clatter of wheels on tracks, and underneath it all, voices. Millions of voices speaking in every language that had ever existed, all asking the same questions. Where am I? What happened to me? What comes next? But as I walked further onto the main platform, the chaos began to organize itself into something I could understand. The trains were sorted by type of death, accidents on one level, illness on another, violence on a third. The passengers were being guided by conductors and staff members toward different areas of the station based on their needs and their readiness to move forward. And at the center of it all, rising from the platform like a skyscraper made of light and shadow, was the station master's tower. I thought the conductor was impressive, but the station master was something else entirely. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of his presence, ancient, patient, and absolutely impartial. He wasn't good or evil, just necessary like gravity or entropy or the passage of time itself. Impressive, isn't it? A familiar voice said behind me. I turned to see Sarah Chen walking up, but she looked different here at Terminal Station. More solid, more real, with a confidence that hadn't been present at Shadowmere. Sarah? What are you doing here? I'm a guide, she said with a smile. This is where I work. Shadowmere Station was just one of my regular stops. I help newly deceased souls understand their situation and prepare for the final transition. You mean you've been dead longer than 6 months? Try 6 years, she said. Time really doesn't work the way you think it does in the afterlife. I've been helping people like you for a long time now, Jake. People who died confused and need someone to explain what's happening to them. I felt a surge of betrayal. You lied to me. I simplified the truth to help you process it gradually, she corrected gently. If I told you everything at once at Shadowmere Station, you would have panicked and probably ended up like those shadow figures, lost in the memory of your death. You needed to ride the Night Express to see the alternatives, to understand what your choices really meant. Around us, I could see other souls being guided through the station by various staff members. Some went willingly, walking toward passages filled with warm light. Others resisted, clinging to conductors or guides, begging for more time or another chance. A few simply sat down on benches and refused to move at all. What happens to the ones who won't cooperate? I asked. Sarah followed my gaze to a man in a business suit who was arguing with 3 different guides, insisting that there had been some kind of mistake, that he was supposed to be in a board meeting, not standing in some impossible train station. They get as much time as they need, she said. But eventually they have to choose. The afterlife doesn't allow for permanent indecision. You move forward, you move backward, or you become part of the system that helps others make the same choice. Like the conductor offered me. Yes, though I should mention that he wasn't being entirely honest about his motivations. Sarah's expression became serious. The conductor position isn't just a job, Jake. It's a form of purgatory. The current conductor isn't looking to retire. He's looking to be released from a sentence he's been serving for nearly a century. A sentence for what? For refusing to accept his own death. He was a railroad man in life, killed in a train accident in 1924. When he found himself on the Night Express, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving the only world he'd ever known. So he accepted a position as conductor, thinking it would let him stay connected to the rail system he loved. Sarah gestured toward the Night Express, where I could see the conductor helping new passengers board. From this distance, he looked almost completely transparent. But the job requires you to give up pieces of yourself constantly, she continued. Every time you help a passenger move on to the next stage, you lose a little more of your own humanity. The current conductor has been doing this for so long that he barely remembers who he was in life. He's more ghost than person now. And he wants me to take his place? He's desperate to be released. The only way for a conductor to move on is to find a suitable replacement. And you, Jake, with your security background and protective instincts, seem like the perfect candidate. I thought about the conversation with the other version of myself in Car 7. The way he'd made the job sound meaningful, important, like it would give my existence the purpose it had lacked in life. But it would be a trap, I said. Not a trap exactly. More like a very long detour. You could help thousands of souls over the decades, maybe centuries. That's genuinely meaningful work. But you'd be postponing your own journey indefinitely, and eventually, you'd lose so much of yourself that you'd forget why you took the job in the first place. A chime sounded throughout the station, and I looked up to see a message board displaying departure times for what looked like hundreds of different destinations. But these weren't places, they were concepts. Understanding, reunion, renewal, judgment, redemption. And at the bottom of the list, in letters that seemed to pulse with their own light, final rest. Those are the options? I asked. Some of them, Sarah said. The afterlife isn't one size fits all, Jake. Different souls need different kinds of continuation. Some people want to be reunited with loved ones. Others need to understand the meaning of their life before they can rest. A few require judgment for things they did wrong, and some just want the peace of eternal sleep. What did you choose? I haven't yet, she admitted. My work as a guide is temporary, a way to process my own death while helping others. When I'm ready, I'll choose my own destination. But Jake, I've been watching you throughout this journey, and I think I know what you need. Yeah, what's that? You need to forgive yourself. The words hit me harder than I expected. Forgive myself for what? For not living up to your own expectations. For settling for a job that felt meaningless. For not finding love, not making an impact, not becoming the person you thought you should be by age 26. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Jake, you've been carrying guilt about wasting your life, but you didn't waste it. You were kind to people. You were responsible. You showed up to work even when you didn't want to, and you took pride in doing your job well, even if it seemed unimportant. I was a security guard at an industrial complex. I spent my nights walking around empty buildings. You were protecting people's livelihoods, she corrected. Those buildings contained equipment and materials that dozens of families depended on for their income. Your presence deterred crime and prevented accidents. That mattered even if it felt mundane. I wanted to argue, but as she spoke, I found myself remembering things I'd forgotten. The time I caught a group of kids trying to break into the chemical storage building and probably save them from serious injury. The night I'd noticed a gas leak and called it in before it could become dangerous. The dozens of times I'd helped lost delivery drivers find the right loading dock or given directions to workers who'd forgotten their key cards. Small things, unimportant things, but things that had made other people's lives a little easier. The point is, Sarah continued, you don't need to become a conductor to find meaning in your existence. Your life had meaning already. You just couldn't see it because you were too focused on what you thought success was supposed to look like. Another chime sounded, and this time it was followed by an announcement that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake Morrison, please report to the station master's office. Jake Morrison to the station master's office. My blood would have run cold if I'd still had blood. The station master wanted to see me personally. Is that normal? I asked. Sarah shook her head, looking concerned. No, it's not. Most souls never interact directly with the station master. The guides and conductors handle almost everything. Maybe it's about the conductor position. Maybe. Or maybe. She paused, looking uncertain. Jake, has anyone explained to you why you were able to board the Night Express in the first place? What do you mean? Living people can't see the Night Express, let alone climb aboard. The train only appears to souls who have died in confusion or denial. But you boarded while you were still alive, still breathing. That should have been impossible. I thought back to that foggy night at the industrial complex, trying to remember the exact sequence of events. The fog getting thicker, the air becoming harder to breathe, the sound of the train whistle calling to me through the darkness. I was dying, I said slowly. The carbon monoxide was already affecting me when I heard the train. I was in the process of dying, but not dead yet. Exactly. Which means you're something very rare, a soul who crossed over while still technically alive. The station master may want to discuss the implications of that. She led me through the station toward the central tower, past platforms filled with confused souls and patient guides, past trains that looked like they belonged in museums and others that seemed to be made of pure light. As we got closer to the tower, I could feel the station master's presence growing stronger, like standing near a massive generator. The tower's entrance was a simple door marked Administrative Offices, but when Sarah opened it, I found myself standing in a space that defied geometry. The room was simultaneously enormous and intimate, with a ceiling that stretched up into infinity and walls that seemed to curve around us in a perfect circle despite the door being in a straight hallway. The station master sat behind a desk made of what looked like crystallized time, transparent, but with depths that showed glimpses of every moment that had ever occurred. He was tall and thin, wearing a conductor's uniform that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself, complete with moving stars and nebulae. When he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing not just who I was, but every possible version of who I could have been, every choice I'd made and every choice I hadn't, every moment of my life and death simultaneously. Jake Morrison, he said, his voice like the sound of distant thunder. The security guard who boarded the Night Express while still alive. Do you know how unprecedented this is? Sarah mentioned it was unusual. Unusual? He laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of crystal. Jake, in the entire history of the Night Express, and we're talking about thousands of years, only 3 people have ever boarded while still technically alive. The other 2 became legends. What happened to them? One chose to return to life, carrying knowledge of death back with him. He became a great healer, helping people prepare for their own transitions. The other chose to remain in the between space, becoming something more than human but less than divine. He still rides the trains, helping souls who are lost between life and death. The station master stood up and walked around the desk. Up close, he was even more imposing, radiating authority that felt older than civilization. You have a third option that no other soul has ever had, he continued. Because you crossed over while alive, because you've retained your full humanity throughout this journey, you have the power to reform the entire system. Reform it how? The Night Express has become corrupted over the millennia, he said. Too many souls like the current conductor have accepted positions to avoid their own transitions. The train system has become less about helping souls move forward and more about providing hiding places for those afraid to face eternity. The passengers are being manipulated and delayed instead of being genuinely helped. He gestured toward a window that showed the Night Express pulling away from Terminal Station, carrying a new load of confused souls. A living soul with full knowledge of both sides could change that, he said. Could become a conductor who actually helps passengers instead of trapping them. Could reform the rules, update the procedures, ensure that the Night Express serves its proper purpose instead of enabling eternal procrastination. But I'd be trapped in the position forever, just like the current conductor. No, the station master said, his voice becoming gentle. Because you would retain your humanity, you would retain the power to choose your own destination when you're ready. The position would be temporary, a way to help repair the damage while processing your own death at your own pace. It was tempting. More than tempting. The chance to give real meaning to my existence, to help thousands of lost souls find their way, to be part of something genuinely important instead of just walking around empty buildings. But Sarah's words echoed in my mind. You need to forgive yourself. Can I ask you something? I said. The station master nodded. Do you think my life was wasted? He studied me for a long moment, those cosmic eyes seeing depths I couldn't imagine. Jake Morrison worked the night shift as a security guard for 8 months. In that time, he prevented 6 break-ins, stopped 4 acts of vandalism, called in 3 safety hazards, and helped dozens of people with small problems they couldn't solve themselves. He was reliable, honest, and kind. He paid his taxes, didn't hurt anyone, and tried his best with the circumstances he was given. The station master sat back down behind his impossible desk. "Your life wasn't wasted, Jake. It was simply ordinary. And there's nothing wrong with ordinary. The universe needs people who show up, do their job, and treat others with basic decency. Grand gestures and world-changing achievements are rare by definition. Most meaningful lives are built from small, consistent acts of responsibility and kindness." I felt something loosening in my chest, a knot of shame and disappointment that I'd been carrying since my death. Maybe since long before my death. What happens if I just move on? I asked. If I choose one of those destinations on the departure board and leave the Night Express to find its own solution? Then you move on, he said simply. You accept what you were, let go of what you thought you should have been, and step forward into whatever form of continuation feels right for your soul. The conductor will eventually find another replacement, the system will muddle along as it has for centuries, and you'll find peace. And if I take the conductor position? Then you'll spend however long it takes to repair the Night Express, helping genuinely lost souls while working through your own issues about meaning and purpose. When you're ready, whether that's decades or centuries from now, you'll choose your own destination and move forward. Both options had merit. Both offered their own form of peace. But as I stood there in that impossible office, looking at the station master who radiated patient wisdom and Sarah who had become more than a guide to me, I realized I'd already made my choice. I want to help, I said, but not as a conductor, as a guide like Sarah. Someone who can work with newly deceased souls while still processing my own death. Someone who can help reform the system from the ground up instead of just managing it. The station master smiled, an expression like sunrise over a mountain range. An excellent choice. The guide position offers the same benefits as conducting, the ability to help others while working through your own transition, but with more flexibility and less risk of losing yourself in the role. He reached into his desk and pulled out a badge that looked like it was made of crystallized starlight. When he handed it to me, it was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with life. Welcome to the staff, Jake Morrison. Your first assignment is to work with Sarah, learning how to help souls who died in industrial accidents. Your experience with workplace safety should prove invaluable. I pinned the badge to my security guard uniform and immediately felt a change. Not a loss of humanity like I'd feared, but an expansion of it. I could sense the needs of every confused soul in Terminal Station, could feel their fear and hope and desperate desire to understand what had happened to them. How long do I have to decide about my final destination? I asked. As long as you need, the station master said. Some guides work for a few months, others for several lifetimes. The choice will always be yours. Sarah squeezed my hand as we left the station master's office. Ready to help some confused souls figure out what happened to them? Yeah, I said, looking out over the vast expanse of Terminal Station with its thousands of platforms and millions of lost souls. I think I am. For the first time since I died, I felt like I had a purpose that mattered. Not because I was avoiding my own transition, but because I was embracing it fully while helping others do the same. I was still Jake Morrison, the security guard who died from carbon monoxide poisoning while walking his rounds. But now I was also something more, a guide for souls making the most important journey of their existence. And for the first time in my life or death, that felt like enough. As Sarah and I walked toward the platform where the next group of confused souls was arriving, I heard a familiar whistle in the distance. The Night Express, beginning another journey with passengers who needed help understanding their situation. Someday I would board a different train, one that would take me to my own final destination. But for now, I had work to do, souls to help, and my own death to process at my own pace. The 3 a.m. Express had brought me exactly where I needed to be, even if it wasn't where I'd expected to go. Sometimes, the best destinations are the ones you never knew you were looking for.